thank you all for being here tonight. It is such a pleasure to see this room full of people, specifically full of students and colleagues. That is such a treat. I really appreciate you all coming out tonight. I know it's a really busy time of the semester, and it is no small thing to spend your time in this space. So thank you for choosing to do that with me. It is such a pleasure to be here. This is my first semester at Denison, and to be invited to do this was a real honor, and it feels, since I've gotten here, like you all have made it home very quickly. So very pleased to be here for the home series and the last installment of the Beck. And also come out to all those Beck installments in the spring because those writers are excellent, some of my faves. So I'm going to read a little bit from this book, Tomboyland, and I think what I'm going to do is read a couple of different pieces for y'all tonight. So in my creative writing classes, I have a couple students in the room tonight. Hi, thanks for being here. We've been talking a lot about essays, and probably more than some people would like because, it's my jam. So we've been talking about, in our essay section, we spent some time talking about different forms of essaying and what the essay can be and what the essay can do. We spend most of our youth, I think, growing up thinking of the essay as this thing that has to make an argument or convince somebody of something. It has 5 paragraphs. It's very concise. Everything is backed up and proven. And so what we try to do, and I think what we've done in our intro class, is kind of redefine what an essay can do and be, kind of blow up that definition and think of an essay instead as this sort of form that asks questions. And so that's what I like to do in my work, and that's what most of this book is sort of a lot of different ways of asking questions. And so how I do that is through a couple different forms. So we've talked about lyric essay in our classes. We've talked about narrative essay. So it does those two things, and then it also kind of takes on forms of interview, reportage, things like that. So it's kind of, some of these pieces are marriages of all 3 forms. I'm not going to read all 3 forms for you tonight, but I am going to try to do some jumping around to show you kind of what I mean when I talk very geekily and excitedly in classes about essays, and I don't know, maybe I'll convince some of you who are still skeptical that an essay is a super exciting form, I promise. Okay, so this book is a lot of things. It's about the Midwest, it's about gender, it's about sexuality, it's about class, all of the things Margot said. And so the pieces I'm going to read tonight sort of engage with all of those things in some way or another. And so the first one I'm going to read from, my essays are really long, so I can't read an entire essay for you, or we'd be here until like midnight. The first one I'm going to read from is probably one of the oldest in the collection. I was working on this for like 10 years, which probably sounds terrifying to some of you. Had you told me when I went to get my MFA that it was going to take me 10 years to write and publish my first book, I would have I don't know actually what I would have done. So just ignore actually that I said that. So this first essay I'll read from is one of the oldest in the collection. I started it when I was in my MFA program, and I was really interested in this idea of the lyric essay. And I also started getting really interested in the braided essay, which I learned about when I was a graduate student, and we've done a little bit of work on the braided form in my intro classes, where you kind of take these seemingly disparate elements and weave them together to create some sort of cohesive narrative, hopefully, if you're successful. And so this first essay is kind of doing that. So this is one of the more lyric essays in the collection. And I'll stop talking about it and start reading from it now. But the essay is called Driftless. And I'll just read a couple short sections so you can kind of see the way that the braid is working, hopefully. Okay, so this is Driftless, and there's an epigraph And the epigraph goes, "Now by the path I climbed, I journey back. The oaks have grown, I have been long away." And that is a quote from Edna St. Vincent Millay, the poet. It's going to date me, so you're all going to know how old I am. In the summer of '89, it barely rained. More than 50 days passed without a drop. The corn dried up. The crops didn't yield. Acres of farmland turned brown in the sun. Neighbors and livestock died in the heat. Wildfires tore across the plains. But we were too young to worry, to know what the word drought could mean to a small Midwestern town like ours or the miles of farmland that surrounded it. We spent our days in the fields and woods, the sun high and bright through the leaves. We traveled in packs. We wandered alone. We were great in number. We were two at a time. We scuffed up our jeans, scraped up our knees, tore holes in shirts that got snagged on branches. We climbed the trees and yelled into the wind, and no one heard but us. We ran for miles, the dry summer grasses nicking our shins, trying to find the place where land met sky. We hiked through the goldenrod up to our waists, our eyes swelling and legs itching, and laid down to watch the clouds move east. And then we walked back the way we came, outlines of our bodies on the ground behind us, bright yellow dust on our skin. We were people of the prairie. We were people of the trees. We were the maple and birch, the oak and elm. We were corn and wheat and soy. We were the black earth that grew it. We were bluestem and switchgrass. We were rivers and lakes. And out past the horizon of hardwood and pine, we were mountains. We were girls. We were boys. We were neither and both. We were small. We were nothing. We were taller than the trees. In southwestern Wisconsin, where I grew up, there exists a geological phenomenon. It's called the driftless area, a narrow stretch of land that somewhat miraculously was bypassed by the last continental glacier. What results is a strange, rare terrain that extends some 20,000 square miles, composed primarily of that small corner of the state and edging over the borders of Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois. Its name refers to drift, rocks and gravel, silt and clay and sand, the sediment left in the wake of retreating glaciers. It's the stuff that exists beneath the surface of most terrain. But here, in the driftless area, such elemental makeup is scarce where it exists at all. The upper Midwest owes much of its landscape to the movement of the glaciers. Minnesota's 10,000 lakes, carved from the earth by walls of ice and filled with water. The long rolling prairies of south central Wisconsin and northern Illinois. But the driftless area, also known as the Paleozoic Plateau, is marked instead by a landscape wholly unlike the rest of the region. That of rolling hills and steep forested hillsides that stretch down to valleys, sharp limestone cliffs and bedrock outcroppings with lakes and quarries below them, paths cut by winding rivers and cold water streams. If you look to the horizon, you'll see the most striking part of the region, small mountains or mounds, and among them monadnocks, strange solitary peaks that seem to rise up out of nowhere from the middle of a plain. These are the tops of ancient mountains, whole ranges long buried beneath the surface of the earth. After generations of erosion, when layers of softer rock have been washed away in the formation of surrounding valleys, the harder rock is all that remains, emerging from the earth as isolated mountains. The mountains shouldn't be here. They're incongruous, out of place. They're an anomaly, an abnormality, a glitch in the system. They're also beautiful. The landscape of Wisconsin is both forest and farm, lands both rolling and flat. It is endless prairie and deep, untouched woods. It is a place of lakes both great and small, of rivers, creeks, and streams. It is a place whose lands are neither one thing nor the other, a whole containing multitudes. But the mountains, they're not quite right. Amid the rest of the landscape, it would seem clear to someone first encountering them that they just don't belong. This is the landscape that made me. In the summer of '98, we drank pilfered beer in unfinished basements. We stayed up late and cut our fingers with scissors, pressing them together until our pulses beat in time. We snuck out to the softball field just before sunrise, the sky a blaze of black and blue. We ran the bases, our legs wobbly, the sand and rock beneath the mud, our bare feet slapping against the cold slick of it. We passed a bottle between us, taking long pulls like old pros, like we watched so many people do before us. We rolled our bodies like barrels down the hill to center field, where cleat marks were still carved in cold earth, where the ghosts of mosquitoes still buzzed. We breathed hard, our backs on the ground, our knees and elbows slick with sand, our bodies close, but not touching, silent as the sky before a storm. We were girls, but not yet women. We were something in between. We were 15, we were on fire, our skin was hot all the time, buzzing and open and raw, like it could be peeled off entirely, a whole girl-shaped shell, the thin shedding vellum of a sunburn. To quiet the constant itch of it, we did everything we could to feel something else, to feel anything or nothing at all. We drank, we fought, we went without sleep. We lay on our backs on bedroom floors and turned the music up loud, longing to be the subjects of love songs. We talked on the phone late into the night, the long pink coil of cords wrapped around fingers and wrists. Breasts smashed into sports bras, dirt beneath black painted nails. We were starting to think about the power our bodies might hold. We did not yet know the power they lacked or that which could be taken. We tried on skirts and our shirts got tighter. We shaved our legs and hairsprayed our bangs and painted our eyes. We rode with boys in pickup trucks out into the country, the summer wind in our hair. We started kissing those boys and sometimes let them go further. We might have dreamed of kissing girls, though none of us had the words for it yet. We ached for everything and for anything other than this. The slow, quiet life of our small hometown, its stillness and silence, the feeling that we were stuck. We knew that somewhere beyond this place, the whole huge world was waiting. And I'll stop that one there. So basically, like, where it goes from there is I keep sort of moving between that sort of lyrical, personal, meditative tone, and then this kind of more straightforward narrative voice that talks about the landscape. And the landscape, maybe it's clear from that passage that I read, becomes a metaphor for the body and my body and the way that our bodies exist in the lands that we grow up in, and how those lands kind of define us or complicate us. So we've talked a lot in intro about metaphor and the ways that metaphor can be super fun and say things sometimes that we don't want to say. So I find that really fun. Okay, so now I'm going to read from something totally different. So I think I'm going to do, there was a packet that was handed out. I don't know if you folks got that, but there's an essay in there that was excerpted called Tomboy, and it's sort of like the near title essay of this book. And it is super long. It's like 10,000 words. It's so long. Sorry for anybody who read the whole thing. But it was sort of the way that this book came together. I had been writing about land and like the body and the way and this relationship between body and the land, and I had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just writing into these spaces for years. And then eventually, after many years, something clicked, and this essay kind of became the heart of that intersection. And it goes all over the place. It's about land, and it's about the body, and it's about sexuality, and it's about gender. It's also about violence. It's about a lot of things. So I'll read a couple little sections from that. But it's a very sort of narrative tone. It kind of steps away from this lyric quality of the last piece. And we've talked a little bit in class about something else that an essay can do that I find really exciting, which it can kind of be this tapestry of scene and anecdote. And sometimes when a student or I am struggling with an essay, one of the best tools is just to like write a scene and then put a little break on the page and then write another scene and then put a little break on the page and then write another scene. And then you have this whole collection of scenes that you start to sort of see a theme or a story emerge, and you can move these little scenes around. And hopefully, if it starts working, what happens is this sort of tapestry of scene and vignette and anecdote come to life on the page. Or maybe I'm just making that up and it doesn't work at all. This is what I tell myself. Just kidding. Sort of. The thing about being a writer is that like we're just figuring it out as we go. So like nobody knows exactly what they're talking about. I really hate to break it to you. Okay, so we're going to read a few sections from this piece called Tomboy. And now for something completely different. This also has an epigraph, which I'll read. I love epigraphs. They can do a lot of work for you. This epigraph is from Audre Lorde. I have always wanted to be both man and woman, to incorporate the strongest and richest parts of my mother and father within and into me, to share valleys and mountains upon my body the way the earth does in hills and peaks. You're going to learn some things about me. A few years ago, I went out for drinks with a new friend. We'd met at a mutual friend's birthday party, and this was our first time out alone. When I showed up to the bar, a dimly lit oyster spot in Brooklyn, I quickly realized she thought we were on a date. She wore a semi-transparent white shirt and bright red lipstick, her long hair falling in dark curls around her shoulders. She was attractive. We sat at the bar and talked. She flirted, and I tried not to. I downed a drink and some oysters, then ordered another round. The bar was packed and hot. I peeled off my sweater and, dabbing the sweat off my neck, worked up the nerve to say what I needed to. So, I started, I should tell you. She leaned in closer. When we'd first arrived, she had pulled my chair with me on top of it, closer to hers. It was a bold move and one I could not help but admire. Our knees were almost touching. I'm in a relationship, I said with a grimace, a committed one. Ah, she said, leaning back a little, a flash of disappointment in her eyes, her chin dipped in a slow nod of recognition. But she smiled. Well, that's okay, she said. The thing is, I went on, procrastinating, searching the bottom of my glass for any sweet remnant of whiskey that might be hiding in the ice. It's with a man? To say that I watched her face fall would be an understatement. It plummeted headlong off a cliff into a swamp of disbelief and despair. No, she said, stretching out the moan of the O as she turned from me toward her drink, poured what was left of it down her throat, then planted her elbows on the bar and held her head in her hands. It was an inflated gesture, partly for comic effect. My new friend was funny, but her surprise was genuine. No way, she said, shaking her head. I nodded, my stomach tight with regret, not for the fact itself, but for the thought of disappointing this new person whom I liked so much, this funny, queer woman who I hoped might be my friend. I felt an old, familiar fear that she would no longer want anything to do with me now that she knew the truth. She looked at me, shook her head, and said, I can't believe you're straight. The night we first met, my partner was sure I was gay, and for what it's worth, I assumed the same of him, which makes for a pretty funny story to tell at parties. I don't talk about my sexuality or gender identity much. I've never felt particularly connected to a certain identity, nor has any language ever seemed to fit. And where I come from, we're not raised to talk about ourselves, let alone our sexual proclivities or gender identities. I had never even heard the term gender identity until late in college when I took a bold leap and enrolled in a women's studies class. It hadn't occurred to me a person had a gender identity, let alone that it might be in conflict with their biological sex. I'm not straight, and my gender identity is complicated. I never really had a coming out, in part because I never thought I had the right, and in part, as difficult as it is to admit, because I'm still afraid to say some things aloud. But it's also because I so often feel like I don't have the language. There are words I use sometimes, words like bisexual, which attempts to define who I'm attracted to and who I seek intimacy from. Words like genderqueer or simply queer, which attempts to define the ways my body doesn't conform to traditional notions of gender. I use these words because they're the best words I have. But sometimes they make me uneasy. And sometimes I feel like I'm still seeking the words that fit, that feel more right, that might help me feel like I belong. On average, I get misgendered at least twice a week. I get called sir far more often than ma'am or miss, a fact that makes itself most apparent in restaurants where servers still insist on addressing their guests in these binary terms. For you, sir, he will say, for the misgendering server is almost always a man. He might realize his mistake or second-guess his assumption. He'll stumble, fluster, stammer a bit. Oh, he might say, sorry. It's okay, I'll say, my voice bright and cheery and pitched up a notch, an attempt to sound a little more like a woman. No worries, happens all the time. I hate myself when I do this. I feel complicit in the system that shames me, complicit in preserving my own shame. But I keep this collection of words and tones in my linguistic toolbox anyway, for just such an occasion, and use them to reassure the perpetrator that I'm not angry, that I'm friendly and unthreatening, that I won't punish him with a bad tip or a scene, that I will be the one to accommodate him. Sometimes my dining companions remain oblivious to this small drama unfolding in front of them, but sometimes they notice, and this is worse. What the hell? They'll loud whisper when he scurries away. Don't worry about it, I'll say, trying to change the subject. But seriously, they'll insist, it's not like, it's hard to tell. In the silence that follows, my dining companions, be they friends or family or colleagues or strangers, will look down at their plates, their embarrassment palpable. I'll sip my drink or stuff calamari into my mouth and know that what lives in that silence, at least for a moment or two, are thoughts about my body. Sometimes, at least, I get a free dessert out of it. Sometimes I call myself a woman, but sometimes I avoid the word. At various points in my life, I've wondered what exactly it means and how I fit or don't into the shape of it. By default, I've always checked the female box on applications and medical forms. But my body has never been a simple answer to any question. I don't always look like a woman, and I don't always feel like one. Uncertainty is hardly unique among those of us born into female bodies, but as my own body moves through the world, it is marked by one common question: what are you? And the honest answer is, I don't really know. Skipping around a little bit here. Growing up, I was a tomboy. It's what people called me and what I eventually started calling myself. At first, I resisted the word. I knew that when people called me tomboy, it was meant to call out my difference, that it set me apart from the other girls in my small Midwestern town. And back then, I didn't want to be different. On more than one occasion, I recall my small self, fists on hips, insisting I'm a tom girl and campaigning to get the word to stick. But I also secretly loved the word boy attached to me. I played with the boys and acted like a boy. I fought and spat and swore and yelled, climbed trees and built forts and splashed in the mud. I played sports and rode bikes and banged up my knees. I hated anything deemed girly, rejected dresses and dolls in the color pink. When I was in second grade, I insisted my mother let me cut my hair short and spiky like all the other boys. After weeks of begging, she relented, with the one caveat that I leave it long in the back. She cut around my ears, and I sculpted my spikes with gel, the rest of my hair cascading down my back, the first of several horrible mullets. On a deeper level, though, I often felt like a boy. I often wished I was a boy. Sometimes I even prayed to be a boy, pleading with a God I wasn't even sure I believed in, that I might wake up the following day and everything would be different. Being a girl made me angry. It felt like a curse to be a girl, a cruel injustice that I had to be anything other than a boy. I fought with the boys who called me girl and with the girls who called me boy. On the school bus, when the older boys called me beast and spat into my hair, I spat back. I plucked the head off the only Barbie I owned, her impossibly proportioned and headless body serving as the one thing I understood a woman's body to be, the object of male desire. Alone in the bathtub, I smashed the green muscled bodies of my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles action figures against the smooth, pale skin of my headless plastic woman. In my childhood fantasy, she fulfilled the role of girlfriend to Leonardo, the manliest hero of the sewer-dwelling mutant quartet. Their romance was always narrated from Leo's perspective, his repressed sexual energies expended deep below the surface of the water, among the bubbles, out of sight, even from me. One day at the Montessori school I attended for preschool and kindergarten in my small Wisconsin town, my friends and I played outside in the sun. It was hot, and the boys ran around with their shirts off, so I took mine off too. "Girls need to wear their shirts, Melissa," a teacher said. Instead of putting my shirt back on, I climbed to the roof of the school. I have no idea how I got there, but in my memory, there I stand, shirtless and defiant, bare feet on the hot slate shingles, waving my t-shirt triumphantly in the air and refusing to come down. In one version of the memory, I whip the shirt above my head like a lasso and launch it to the ground, laughing maniacally at my own dissidence. However it happened, what I know for sure is, at least for a little while, I stayed there, a veritable boy of summer, bare-chested in the sun. I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'm very into questions. So whatever you got, fire them at me, whether it's about craft, writing about things that are hard to write about, embarrassing your family and friends. What do you got? Great question. I always start with the anecdote. It's like, I would say like 8 out of 10 times I start an essay with an anecdote, like something that has just been spinning around in my head for a while, and I know that there's something there, and I know that it's about, like X and Y, but maybe it's also about Z, so I'll write that anecdote. And then usually more anecdotes come. And then I've got this pile of anecdotes, and I need to figure out how to sort of connect them with narrative. But all about that anecdotal start. Other questions? Don't be shy. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I had no idea I was interested in writing about gender, or any really any of the things that I end up writing about a lot. I think when I started writing essays when I was in college, and I was really into sort of humorous David Sedaris style, cultural observations and things like that. And I don't know that I had one interest. It was just I wanted to be funny. I wanted to be a funny writer, I think. And then I went to grad school and everything got really serious. And I started writing very serious essays about, I don't even know what, but it was like, it was so overwrought. But I got really interested in the lyric essay there, and studied a little poetry too, and so I was very interested in more interested almost in form than in subject, which I think created a lot of empty feeling essays. But an interesting thing happened because I was born and raised in Wisconsin, and left for grad school when I was about 26, and found myself in New York, and just total fish out of water. And I started writing essays about home, which is something I never thought I'd be interested in doing. I spent a lot of time growing up, couldn't wait to leave the Midwest, could not wait. And then when I finally did, of course, I started writing about home. I was homesick, and I was writing about these landscapes, and I was writing about the people that I missed, and the people that kind of made me who I was. And so then I started realizing I was writing about the Midwest, and I thought maybe I would write an essay collection about the Midwest. And there's a lot of Midwest in this book. It's really about the Midwest in a lot of ways, but as I sort of started, again, it took many years, I think I realized that I couldn't really write about the landscapes of the Midwest without talking about my very sort of deeply connected relationship to the land. And so I was thinking about my family who were farmers and their relationship to the land. And I was thinking a lot about colonization and displacement, so that complicated and brought a lot of depth to the writing that I was doing about land. And so that was kind of when the gender thing clicked. Something clicked, and I realized that I was writing about my body and this land, but I was also sort of starting to understand my own identity a little bit more, It was right around then that I decided, I was like, oh, I think I'm writing about queerness, and I'm writing about the body and the very deeply connected intersection of those two things for me. So there was definitely an aha moment where I was kind of looking at all this mess of work and was like, oh, I'm writing about gender, and I'm also writing about class, and it would be interesting to explore the intersections of those two things. So it took a long time to get there, but I got there. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
In terms of craft, do you approach each story with a specific tone, or does that come later in the writing process?
Good question. I think that I definitely enter essays now with a more narrative tone. I think that's kind of how I approach most things that I write. I've specifically been trying to write this very short, a flash essay for a while now that's very lyrical, and I just keep banging my head against it. And I don't think I'm done with lyricism. I really love the lyric essay and that tone, but I just keep getting pulled back into this very narrative, sort of conversational storytelling voice. But my favorite thing to do is sort of try to wed them. So start with that kind of very narrative tone, and then if I've got, especially if there's a metaphor working, then I'll kind of dip into the more lyrical tone when I'm sort of examining that more metaphorical element of the essay. But I don't usually have a plan at all about anything when I start. I'm just I've got this question or this anecdote or this idea, and I'm gonna enter it. And I just sort of enter it and dig around for a long time. And hope that I excavate something. I don't think that's helpful, but the magic and the alchemy of what we do. Other questions? I'll go back here first, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, great question. Thank you. There's a really excellent tool in the essay that I encourage all of my students to use liberally, which is the asterisk. Just a little break. And so what that does formally is it signals to your reader that you're shifting. Some shift is happening, and that can be in terms of subject, that can be in terms of time, that can be in terms of tone. So if I have a couple paragraphs that are narrative or that are about one subject, and then I want to move on, sometimes I will literally just put that asterisk in and then move on to something completely different. And because there's been that little signal, I think that shift kind of works. So it kind of it allows you to liberate yourself as a writer from the scourge of the transition, which is they're so hard to write sometimes. So this is just don't worry about it. Just put that little dot in and see what happens. And sometimes, when you start revising your work and you go back, you're like, oh, this shift doesn't work. Revision to me is when the real magic happens in writing, and I think across forms. And what I'll often do in an essay is either literally cut up pieces of an essay and have them all laid out on the floor like I'm a total mad person, or I'll pin up pages on a wall and see how those transitions from tone or subject are working, or if they're not, and then start to kind of move them around, and you can kind of map out a balance. I was just talking to one of my seniors today about mapping, sort of doing a reverse outline, or mapping out an essay to see oh, I've spent a lot of time in this tone, I've got to shift into this, or too much time in this subject, I need to switch to another subject. So it's all a balance. It's a big balancing act. Does that help? Okay. We can talk more too. Yeah. Hi, Linda. No. I don't know. Maybe some people do. I don't. It never stops being scary. And I think, honestly, that's part of the reason I keep returning to it, I don't know. There's something thrilling in that fear, and it's like performing, if you perform any kind, and in any way, theater or music or whatever, it's terrifying, right? And you just keep doing it. I don't know, maybe it's partially masochism, you can't help but put yourself in this space that's terrifying. I don't know. But for me, it's I often, writing is the way that I make sense of things, and writing is the way that I start to understand myself and the world. And I guess that, even if it's terrifying, and some of the stuff I write, I still find terrifying, truly, to share with people. It's deeply personal, it's deeply vulnerable, it's hard, it's contentious, I know I'm gonna piss some people off, but I think that as a reader, that's some of the most exciting work I can read, and so that's the kind of work that I want to do too. And if it's not scaring me somehow, it's not worth it, I know when something isn't working if it doesn't scare me a little. Hi, Katie.
Who are some of your favorite essays?
This question. Okay. How long you got? So one of my favorite essayists, who was actually my thesis advisor at Sarah Lawrence, we might have talked about this, is Joanne Beard. Highly, highly recommend her work, especially if you're interested in personal essay. I love, who else do I love? Rebecca Solnit, love Rebecca Solnit. Hanif Abdurraqib, who's coming here next year. Could I announce that yet? Has that been announced? Oh, God. Okay. Who may or may not be involved with us next year. Forget you heard that. Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I love writing about pop culture, and I love reading about pop culture. We did a unit in our intro class this year about writing pop culture, so I find his work about writing about music to be exquisite and oh God, who else? Elena Passarello, she's great and awesome and funny. Man, I could do this all night, actually, so I should probably cut myself off. But I know there are just like a billion more. This question always stumps me for some reason, even though I have entire bookshelves full of essayists. I don't know why. I'll make you a list. Other questions? Yeah. Good question. I'm going to admit something here, which is probably contentious. And actually, I once admitted this to my friend, the fellow essayist Elena Passarello, and she didn't speak to me for a little while. I read predominantly novels, and I grew up reading fiction. When I want to read for fun, I read fiction. I like story collections too, but I love novels. And so I think that my entire, all of my writing is influenced by fiction. And I mean, creative nonfiction is basically a true version of fiction, it's using the same techniques that fiction uses: narrative and scene and image and dialogue and action, conflict. All of those things are at play in good creative nonfiction. So there's fiction all over my work. Well, shouldn't say that. There are fictional techniques all over my work that have influenced my work. But yeah, I will recommend, the best fiction I've read this year so far, a story collection called Night of the Living Res by Morgan Talty. And I know there are a bunch of novels in there. I'll get back to you too about novel recommendations. I'll make some lists. I'll share them. Come find me. Other questions? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Great question. Constantly. It's like the ongoing battle. I was just talking to someone else today, maybe it was Margaret, about so much of the work of being a writer is like protecting your time and carving out that time and space wherever you can get it, and then protecting it so fiercely. Because life will do everything it can to distract you from writing. And it's like, if I step away from it for a minute, I won't return, And so I have I have a very dedicated space that is really important to writing. I have the desk that I return to. I have little rituals. Yeah, I was just telling Margaret today, that like when I'm in writing mode at my desk, I have certain rituals that I do. So I like light a candle. And then when I'm done with writing and I'm moving on to other work, I blow the candle out, just to sort of like try to compartmentalize. So I think having sort of a ritual or having a space that you return to is always really important, and that's hard when you move around a lot, but trying to just kind of carve out little quiet corners wherever you can get them, and just like holding as tightly as you can. That's the key. Thanks, everybody.